OnePlus might have just set itself an impossible task, going back on something so pivotal that seemingly a whole region switched to it, and that's going to be hard to replace. Here's why it matters and why you should care about OnePlus ditching its camera brand partnership. So for a very long time, phones coming out of China from brands like Oppo, Xiaomi, Vivo, OnePlus and so on had a stigma attached to them. Generally, they could get away with packing in better hardware due to a lot of that stuff being manufactured in their home countries. This is of course where the flagship killer came from. And so you ended up with many great phones that housed great processors, lots of RAM, but with software that clashed with many a Western smartphone user's preference, over the top bubbly aesthetics that just felt a bit cheap. But this wasn't an issue reserved for performance. Earlier Chinese smartphone cameras were on paper fantastic pieces of kit, but the software processing just was not up to scratch. Colours were unnatural, there was a lot of processing artifacts going on, such as denoising smoothness that just did not look right, and OnePlus was firmly in this camp just a few years ago really. Many a reviewer would say, sure, the OnePlus cameras are okay for a OnePlus, but they aren't great. And perhaps the most famous and obvious example of this whole thing is with the original Pocophone F1. It shipped with the same primary camera sensor as the Pixel 2 XL, but couldn't match it in the finished photos, unless you sideloaded the Google Camera APK of course. It's only when OnePlus teamed up with Hasselblad on its colour processing that things started to improve. In fact, it wasn't the first Chinese hardware maker to collaborate with a legendary camera brand. Huawei had Leica, Vivo had Zeiss, Oppo eventually would work with Hasselblad as well. It became almost normal to have some sort of partnership in the camera space in China. I'd argue that the images coming out of the Vivos, Oppos and Huawei phones right now are some of the best that you can take on a smartphone. Better than what we get from the likes of the Pixel, the iPhones, even the Galaxy Ultras. Not necessarily from an objective quality, but subjective qualities too. The colours, the tones, the aesthetic of these images is just in a different league. Initially, these camera collaborations were good for the primary reason that, yeah, if you're into photography or you like taking pictures, you're just more likely to go out and buy a smartphone with a name that you trust attached to it. And these camera collaborations are made with the biggest names in photography, so it likely helped sell phones. I actually don't have data on that, that's purely conjecture, but come on, who doesn't want a Leica or a Hasselblad in their pocket? But ironically, almost the secondary effects of the collaboration, the byproduct, is the image processing, which was once a major problem for Chinese smartphone cameras, and now greatly improved. The Hasselblad logo debuted on the OnePlus 9 Pro, but it would actually take a couple of generations before it would have a significant impact. The OnePlus 12, which featured a fantastic array of large camera sensors and quality lenses on the back of it, has taken some of my very favourite photos ever. I mean, I have not taken better photos in my life than with this thing. All of these images are straight out of the automatic camera mode. No filters, no raw, no editing, no presets, just opening the camera and pressing the default button. But what makes these images actually different is that they have character. They're almost dreamy and the colours kind of reflect this feeling, and they represent what I felt in the environments in which I was taking the photos. There's a mood to them. I would love to be able to shoot raw photos and have the skills to edit them to look like this. That's a very rare trait for a smartphone camera, because of course these days the heavy processing is focused on objectivity and getting as much detail from an image as possible, even if the result doesn't look quite as nice. Smartphones have cameras on them, but they are also stacked with an insane amount of processing power. Some even send images to the cloud to be processed and then you re-download them, essentially taking the roof off of what's possible. On the 5th of September 2025, OnePlus's co-founder and owner Pete Lau published a blog post explaining that after half a decade of working with Hasselblad, its color processing partnership would be coming to an end, and in its place, OnePlus's own proprietary image processing pipeline called the OnePlus Detail Max engine. As the name suggests, this new approach looks to make waves, not in fake AI enhancements. Lau specifically pointed out the fake moon situation, where phones of the past were found to be replacing the moon in photos with unnaturally detailed fakes, something that has since ballooned with phone makers like Honor essentially generating images past a certain zoom level. The words clarity, authenticity, and realism are used in this article, which makes me feel both optimistic and skeptical of the finished product and what that might look like. Because there are a couple of ways this can go. A realism and authenticity point towards a camera that isn't here to generate images from prompts and instead deliver a very real image that is taken, not made. And that's something that I believe should be the case for cameras. As I've used tech in recent years that spat out stuff that isn't real, it made me particularly doubtful that the future of smartphone photography will remain a creative space. This blog post makes the Detail Max engine sound like a pretty positive step, but that certainly isn't all. What made the OnePlus cameras so good in my eyes wasn't their ability to capture realism, although they were certainly very good at that. It was the character in the colours and the tones, the subjective qualities, not the objective ones. And in the tech space, objectivity is the name of the game. I mean, you can even hear it in the name Detail Max engine. It sounds like a machine, not a set of artistic principles. Hasselblad cameras are known for not only capturing high-resolution, large-format imagery with its medium-format digital sensors and of course film before that, but the colours are also some of the richest, the finest to come from any digital camera today, much like Leica, and that's where OnePlus will really have to be on its A-game if it wants to continue along a path of producing extremely competitive smartphone camera systems with refreshing colour and contrast qualities. This next piece of speculation might be a reach, so please do indulge me for a second here. We've seen smartphones in and around this price point, I'm going to guess around the $900 to $1,000 mark, downgrade their physical camera hardware and lean on AI to do the heavy lifting. Google did it this year with the Pixel 10, one of the biggest names in the game. And OnePlus has already done it with its 13 and its 12. The 13 had some worse sensors in some areas. And with all of this talk in Lau's post about clarity and realism, it makes me wonder if it's hype to try and fend off any real concerns or criticisms about potentially downgraded hardware. We've kind of opened Pandora's box with that when it comes to downgrading hardware year on year in devices that cost the same or even a bit more money than what they replaced. That does have me worried, though again, since I don't have the details, I can't know for sure. But I have no doubt in my mind that OnePlus's own image processing pipeline will result in objectively good photos, and we aren't likely to return to that blotchy, ugly mess that was the Chinese smartphone processing from before the pandemic. But I do wonder if it's a step back, or perhaps one that takes them back in line with what other phone makers are doing in the West. Potentially another move from OnePlus that shows it's lost its way a bit. I don't know, and since I don't have a device running this engine as we speak, I can't say for certain. I can only speculate. OnePlus might have just set itself a task that it cannot complete, but I am cautiously optimistic that the company known for listening to its community will take on board feedback and make the necessary adjustments to its own image processing pipeline. The ball is now in OnePlus's court, and this will be a real test of its resolve.